Hey everyone, today we're going to learn about colonial literature, the Puritan period, a theocracy. Now what is a theocracy, you might ask? Well, we will find out more about that later. However, first I need you to write your essential question down. How did religion shape the literature of the Puritan period? Here are some important dates, and they range from 1600 to 1750. 1607, we have the founding of Jamestown. 1620, there's Mayflower on Plymouth Rock. Now, William Bradford wrote on Plymouth Plantation after this happened. 1636, Harvard College was founded. 1692, Salem witch trials happened, and we will be learning more about that as well. In 1740 was the Great Awakening, and with this, Jonathan Edwards wrote Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, which we will be reading shortly. So when was the Puritan part of the colonial period? Well, it was the early 1600s to about 1750 or so. This is known as the colonial period because it represents all of the time that the British ruled the colonies in North America. The Puritan period is the overreaching influence of the Puritans and their specific religious practices. So first, the North Puritans. In 1620, 100 or so English men and women settled in Plymouth, Massachusetts, fleeing from religious persecution. Now, what was this persecution? Well, here's an example. One Englishman who had written a pamphlet to reform the Church of England was put in jail, fined, whipped, had the top of his ears cut off, his forehead burned with a hot iron, and his nose slit. Good times, right? One reason the Puritans were allowed to go was because James I was really, frankly, tired of them. They caused him a lot of headaches. Now, James was very Protestant, even more so than his predecessor, Elizabeth I. I mean, he did write the King James Bible and go after witches. But they were even too much for him. The Puritans, that is. So does that mean they deserved the abuse that they got? No. But they certainly dished it out later. Now, the Puritans believed it was their divine mission to come to America. John Winthrop, a Puritan author and future governor, once said in his piece, Bay Colony, "We shall be a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through all the world." Now, the line "city upon the hill" comes from one of Jesus' parables from his Sermon on the Mount. In modern context, it is used in the United States politics to refer to America acting as a beacon of hope for the whole world. And this is John Winthrop. Next, we have 3 Puritan principles. The first one, they wished to have their feelings changed through God's grace. They wanted to be cleansed of envy, vanity, and lust. This was done by only wearing dark drab colors. They did not have mirrors. They did not wear makeup or jewelry. The makeup is really probably for the best. At the time, women and some men, especially in the French court, tended to use arsenic, whether they took it to whiten their skin or it was in their face powder. That's not healthy. As for the lust, women and men kept covered from neck to below the ankles. Skin showing was not appropriate, and especially if you were a woman. They valued plainness, simplicity, especially in the church. Now this means there were no crosses or decorations at home, at church, of any kind. Then we have number 3. They saw their bringing Christianity to America as a divine mission. Now we know they didn't act very Christian-like with the Native Americans, did they? But that's also a two-way street that we're not going to discuss. Some attacked people right off, some didn't. Some brought friendship. They were treated horribly. So guys, this leads us to the Puritan 10 Commandments. You had to know it was coming. Thou shalt not miss church and community meetings is number 1 of their commandments. And they took this seriously. If you missed, someone would be checking on you. And they checked often. If you missed too often, you might find yourself in the stockades. True possibility. Number 2, thou shalt work hard and support my fellow pilgrims. Everyone worked. You worked if you were sick. Unless you were dying, you worked. This started around the age 10 to 12, maybe even younger in some families. Oops, sorry, guys. Number 3, thou shalt worship a strict and Christian God. Number 4, thou shalt put the Lord first in my life and obey his words. Number 5, thou shalt live by the 10 Commandments as written in the Holy Bible. Now, not doing so in a Puritan community could put you in jail or the stockades. Oh, and if you wanted to eat in jail, you brought food or paid for it, or had someone bring it to you. Number 6, thou shalt not dress in bright colors or dance in a wicked manner. Remember, this could cause vanity, envy, or lust. Number 7, thou shalt not perform witchery nor conjure the devil. We will get to this one later when we read the Crucible. Number 8, thou shalt not have any opinions or beliefs not held by the entire community. Guys, you could get banished for this. One did not go against the community. Oh, and by community, I mean the powerful men of the community. Number 9, thou shalt build my home simply and not clutter it with decorations. Guys, that causes vanity and envy. You don't want that. And number 10, thou whom shalt disobey these commandments will be banished or hanged. It's very serious, and they were serious about it. They were not playing around. So Puritan terms and influences. Now first we have predestination. The idea that God knows where each person will end up in eternity. The Puritans believed that those who were blessed with wealth and prosperous family lives were a part of those elected to go to heaven. Now we're going to see this concept when we read Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God by Jonathan Edwards. But also, guys, this means that if you were poor, they believed God did not favor you, or you were a sinner. Do you see how poverty might cause a person a lot of problems with the church and the Puritans? We need to remember this when we're talking about the Salem witch trials. Next, we have Protestant work ethic. Now, guys, this is just good, honest work. The Puritans believed that hard work was a way of winning God's favor, and wealth accumulated through hard, honest work was seen as a sign of godliness. It was encouraged by all Puritans. This Protestant work ethic is a major foundation of the American way of life. Now, good, honest work was very important to the Puritans. So, maybe they think, well, you're poor because you're not working hard enough, so God doesn't favor you. You see how all that works together? So Puritan terms and influences, again, we have plain style. Now, if you saw of Plymouth Plantation, you would be surprised this is considered plain style. Believe it or not, William Bradford is well known for his plain style. It does not look anything like what we would think of as plain style. This simply means that his prose is not ornamental and is not intended to be showy. This falls in line with the Puritan belief that one should not call attention to oneself. This is opposite of Shakespeare, whose writing in England was very showy and meant to showcase his skill as a writer. Guys, when they were in England, the Puritans had theaters shut down because they were so incensed by the vanity and lust and envy it caused. There were no women that played in the plays at this time. They were not acting in the plays. So it was all men, and it was men dressed up as women, and they were saying that those men were causing lust. It's quite funny. And, we're not reading a Plymouth Plantation because I don't hate you. So here's our styles. Let's look at ornate first. We're going to look at Psalms 23, the King James Version of the Bible. This is what King James had written. He didn't write it himself. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Oh, by the way, you don't have to write this down. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. We see how that's ornamental. It's ornate. It's fancy. Now let's look at plain style. From Psalms 23, Bay Psalm Book. This is the first book published in America. The Lord to me a shepherd is, want therefore shall not I. He in the folds of tender grass doth cause me down to lie. To waters calm me gently leads, restores my path does he. Yea, though in valley of death shades I walk, none ill I'll fear, because thou art with me, thy rod and staff my comfort are. Kind of sounds like Yoda, doesn't it? Next we have our genres that the Puritans favored. Now, they loved a good sermon, and we are going to read Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. That is a sermon, and it is amazing, and would have been very frightening to the Puritans at the time. It's full of imagery and personification, and it's one of my personal favorite pieces. Next, we have the religious poetry. Bradford wrote this a lot, as well as a few others. Historical narratives of Plymouth Plantation. This was a historical narrative. They did not feel that literature was for entertainment. Novels and plays were frowned upon due to perceived lack of practical religious value. Now, if you compare these to our genres today, like horror, true crime, murder mysteries, romance, they would think we were friends with the devil. So now we're back to our essential question. How did religion shape the literature of the Puritan period? So, religious values were put above all else in every area of these people's lives. This led to a focus on practical literature, which were the sermons, historical narrative, poetry with a spiritual message. This also led to a certain style of writing that mirrored the Puritan style of living, the plain style. Themes were always religious in nature and reflected the Puritan values. Now here are some examples of Puritan books. Now remember the Bay Psalm book, 1640. Now this was America's first published book, and it was translation of the Bible's Psalms. There was the New England Primer in 1690. It was a spelling and reading book. The Day of Doom, that sounds exciting, doesn't it? It was written in 1662, but unfortunately it was just about the end of times. It wasn't going to be as exciting as one would think. It was by Michael Wigglesworth. Simple poem about Judgment Day, and it was the first bestseller. Guys, Puritan believed everyone should be able to read so they could read the Bible. And this right here, when we look at the New England Primer, is obvious. Can you imagine learning from this? In Adam's fall, we sinned all. Thy life to mend, God's book attend. The cat doth play and after slay. A dog will bite a thief at night. The eagle's flight is out of sight. The idle fool is whipped at school. I mean, it's kind of frightening, isn't it? Can you imagine being a little kid learning to read with that? But they did. The New England Primer. This is a text that's indicative of how large a role of religion played in these people's lives. The religious subtext began for young Puritans as early as the time that child began to learn the ABCs. Now these are Puritan writers to remember. William Bradford. I said we're not going to read this, a Plymouth Plantation. It's a historical narrative. This is important for you to remember though. Jonathan Edwards, whom we will read. Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. It was a sermon. And then there was Anne Bradstreet, Upon the Burning of Our House, and To My Dear and Loving Husband. These were poetry, and most of the time religious poetry. So now we come to the basics, Puritan writing. The purpose of literature is to educate. That's what they thought it was. They didn't think it was for entertainment. It was for pure education and ultimately so you could read the Bible. So we have now the end of Puritanism. Well, first of all, there was no longer need for theocracy. Now, what is theocracy? It's the second time we've seen this word. Well, theocracy is a government where the church rule in the name of God. So we saw this a lot in Europe with the Catholic Church, and then we saw it here in the beginning with Puritanism. Puritans became guilty of religious persecution themselves. I mean, they experienced it in England. They dealt it out when they came to America. The Salem witch trials, that was a falling of the Puritanism and the Puritans, and specifically because they flat out committed murder. And then in 1740s, there was a revitalization of Puritanism called the Great Awakening but it didn't really take hold. And as Monty Python would say, now for something completely different. So instead of summarizing your notes, I want you to do this. In the summary section of your notes, for a 100, I want you to answer the above questions in just 1 or 2 sentences. This will be an extra grade outside your notes when you turn them in. This will make your Cornell notes over colonial literature worth up to 2 100s. Using your notes and your knowledge of what we've read and discussed so far, answer the question on your Cornell notes under the summary section. If it's not in summary section, I'm not going to count it because I'm not going to look for it. Remember, I do not read your notes. Answer in a complete sentence or sentences and use specific examples. For example, and you cannot use this one, the Puritan religion shaped the literature during this time by making writers produce mostly sermons and religious poetry because they felt that literature had to be practical. You cannot use that sample. You have to come up with your own. And y'all, everyone, have a good day.